I've been shooting on Sony cameras for over 8 years now, and I remember when I first picked up a Sony mirrorless camera, the native lens selection was pretty small, and third-party lenses consisted of Sigma and then a bunch of lower quality brands. As the native lens lineup started to get filled out, we got everything from the telephoto end to the wide end, but anything in the truly wide angle end was always pretty pricey. Then I discovered that Viltrox, a company that's been making better and better third-party lenses over the past few years, started putting out lenses that kind of went after the G Master lineup. This is the Viltrox 16mm f1.8, a wide-angle lens with a fast aperture of f1.8 that produces great-looking images, has snappy autofocus with solid build quality, and features a de-clickable aperture ring, custom function buttons, and even an LCD screen built into the lens. The best part? It's about a third of the cost of its competitors, coming in at $549. As a disclosure, I was provided this product for free by Viltrox, and I do charge brands a production fee for the time and effort that goes into creating these videos. However, I only produce videos based on my honest opinions and only work with brands whose products I can actually stand behind. Join me in the lab. Let's talk about the build quality, features, and specs of the Viltrox 16 f1.8 lens. The lens isn't necessarily compact, but it isn't a huge lens either. It weighs in at 550 grams or 1.2 pounds and feels substantial in the hand. It has a flat front glass element, which is great if you're like me and use filters all the time, with a filter thread diameter of 77 millimeters. The optical design involves 15 elements with 9 diaphragm blades, which produce some great looking images. The lens itself has an all-metal construction and includes Viltrox's weather-resistant design, including a rubber gasket for those of you who shoot in unpredictable weather. The focus ring utilizes a non-linear fly-by-wire electronic autofocus. However, thanks to the long focus throw, you can get some pretty decent manual focus performance out of this lens, though it's still not as smooth and reliable as a linear manual focus system. There's an autofocus manual focus switch and also a de-clickable aperture ring for those of you who shoot video and prefer the versatility that offers. Then we have 2 custom function buttons on the lens itself, which can be programmed in the Sony camera menu. There's also a bright and responsive informational LCD on the lens, which I haven't seen since the ones that were featured on the Zeiss Batis lenses, which we'll dive into further later. And finally, there's a USB-C port on the lens to allow for future firmware updates, which adds a bit to the future proofing of this lens. Diving right into it, I think the most important question when it comes to any lens, new or old, expensive or cheap, is how good is the image quality? From real-world examples that I've been shooting with this lens, I can say that the sharpness is nice and crisp, giving you detailed images from the centers to the corners, even wide open at f1.8. As with most lenses, as you continue to stop down from f1.8 to 2.8 to f4 and so on, you'll get a progressively sharper image. The color renditioning on this lens along with the contrast look great to my eyes and produce really pleasant results. When it comes to lens flares, people usually fall in 2 camps: those who want a clinically clean, high contrast, never washed out image, and those who embrace the artistic chaos of lens flares. This lens falls into the latter camp. Now, it's not crazy lens flares like you'd get from a vintage lens or anything, but it is present and can definitely wash out your image. However, since it's not overwhelming and reasonably controlled, I'm actually a fan since I can choose to intentionally add some flaring if I want. And if I don't, I can always use a lens hood and opt to shoot to avoid flaring. Now, usually when you're looking at wide-angle lenses, bokeh isn't top of mind, since most of the time you'd have to get too close to your subject to really notice the effect. However, at f1.8, even at how wide of an angle this lens produces, you're still getting soft-looking bokeh with round bokeh ball highlights, which, if you were planning on using this lens for something like vlogging, where you're walking and talking with the lens, then that will give you the option to separate yourself from the background. Speaking of getting close to the subject, the minimum focusing distance of this lens is about 27 centimeters or about 10 inches, which isn't the shortest minimum focusing distance we've seen on lenses in this category, but it is close enough of a minimum focusing distance for you to really get that bokeh we were talking about, and gives you the ability to get some pretty creative shots when combined with the field of view of this lens. With wide and fast lenses, a big concern is vignetting, the darkening of the corners of the image. Wide open at f1.8, you'll notice that there is definitely vignetting happening. However, as you stop down to f2.8 and f4, this effect starts to go away. It's definitely present and is something to consider if you're interested in any wide and fast lenses. Another big concern I always have is how well does it handle distortion, and by that I mean artifacts like pincushion or barrel distortion. Up close, thanks to the perspective perspective of such a wide-angle lens, you're always going to get perspective distortion, but good optical design can help eliminate things like pincushion or barrel distortion and keep straight lines, well, straight. Now, based on my test, I think I can identify some level of distortion, but honestly, it seems so minimal that in actual use, I don't think you're going to notice it in your final image, and it definitely wouldn't arise to the level of being distracting and taking away from your images. Another artifact that often appears with lenses with fast apertures is chromatic aberration, the phenomenon where you typically see green and purple fringing on high contrast subjects, typically like leaves against the sky. Through my personal testing of this lens, I found chromatic aberration to be really well controlled in this lens, with it rarely showing up. I had to do some digging around to see other reviewers' results on this, and it seems to back up my hunch that chromatic aberration just isn't that big of an issue with this lens. Overall, the image quality out of this lens is superb. It's sharp, it's contrasty, and artifacts are kept at bay enough for me to throw this in my camera bag in case I need to whip it out when I need to shoot something with a wider focal length. So next, let's move on to the autofocus. One of the main reasons I find this lens to be such a superb value is not just because it's a wide-angle lens with a fast aperture. There are already a ton of great manual focus lenses that do that, and maybe even do it better. But instead, it's because this lens has great image quality and it has reliable and fast autofocus. This lens utilizes a fast and quiet stepping motor for autofocusing, which, when testing it on both the A7S III and the ZV-E1, I noted that it provided fast and reliable autofocus comparable to results I get from native Sony lenses. When I did my autofocus testing to see how quickly and smoothly it picked up and transitioned to a subject that enters and exits the frame, I found that it did as great of a job as my native Sony lenses. It was the same story again when I did tracking tests, walking up to the camera and away, with the autofocus really locked onto me without any hunting or pulsing. For me, this is one of the biggest selling points of this lens at this price. Alright, now let's address the crazy feature on this lens, the screen. Is it a gimmick? I'd say yes, but that doesn't mean it's useless. On the screen itself, you'll see some information displayed that could be helpful at a glance, like your current f-stop, your current focus distance, as well as what I think is the most useful, a live focus distance scale, letting you know how much depth is in focus at the distance you're currently focused at based on your current f-stop. For those who manual focus based on distance, it's helpful information. But still, that's not something I couldn't live without, and I'm not sure how often I'll actually look at the lens when I'm shooting, but it's an extra feature on an already affordable lens that I think, hey, it might not be for me, but it might be for someone out there, so I won't knock it. The other thing that this lens does uniquely that I haven't seen on any other lens is the ability to set A/B focus points and do focus racks from the lens. That's right, using the function buttons on the lens, you can manually set 2 focus points, and with a press of a button, the lens will rack focus from point A to point B. In practice, how good is this? Well, if you're on a newer Sony system, there's already tap to focus built into your camera. However, it's not as precise or as repeatable as this could be. I think there's still going to be a ton of people who won't use this feature, unfortunately, since it does take time to set your A point and B point, and if you're a run and gun shooter, you're not gonna often have the time to do this. But again, I love the innovation here, and I'd be happy to see this technology be improved and implemented into future lens designs. At the end of the day, the Viltrox 16mm f1.8 comes in at $549. Considering its build quality and optical performance, that's already an insane deal. But to really drive the point home, the closest competitors for Sony cameras in the wide-angle space would be the Sony 12-24 f2.8 G Master, which comes in at $2,471, the Sony 14 f1.8 G Master, which comes in at $1,598, the Sigma 14 1.8 Art, which comes in at $1,599, or the manual focus Laowa 15 f2, which comes in at $649. All in all, I think Viltrox has come such a long way since they entered the market with their lenses. The construction feels great, the glass is impressive, the features are plentiful, and the price is incredible. For anyone shooting a lot of events, weddings, concerts, real estate, landscapes, astro, or even just vlogging, this lens is a strong recommendation if you're looking for a good wide-angle lens for Sony full-frame systems. And of course, if you're interested in checking out this lens, there will be links in the description down below. Alright, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like and a subscribe is always really appreciated. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.